It was just another Tuesday in Austin. No major deadlines, no early meetings, no rain, no storm. Just an average, quiet morning in my small third-floor apartment a few blocks from Zilker Park. I had nowhere to be until 10 a.m., and the sun was beginning to pour through the white blinds on my bedroom window. It should have been peaceful. It used to be. But instead of letting the sunlight wake me gently, I did what I always did. I reached for my phone. Without thinking. No reason. No plan. No awareness. Unlock. Tap. Scroll. Red notification bubbles greeted me like old friends. Instagram. Twitter. Email. CNN. Even Pinterest for some reason. I blinked and opened Twitter. 10 new tweets. Then Instagram. My friend Allison posted brunch photos from Soho. Another friend just got engaged. Someone else adopted a golden retriever. Then the news. Mass layoffs at a tech company. A celebrity scandal. 10 signs you might be burning out. Funny, because I already was. I told myself, just 5 minutes. Then I'll get up, make coffee, take a shower. But when I finally pulled my eyes away from the screen and turned to the digital clock on my nightstand, it read, 8:52 a.m., nearly 90 minutes had disappeared. And I had done absolutely nothing. No breakfast, no movement, no moment of silence to begin the day. Just my eyes locked on a piece of glass, being fed other people's lives, images of success, chaos, beauty, tragedy, while mine stayed still. For a brief second, I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring into the carpet like it might offer an answer. But it didn't. Instead, a cold, quiet realization surfaced. Maybe I wasn't using the internet anymore. Maybe the internet was using me. Let me be clear. I'm not lazy. I show up to work on time. I meet deadlines. People even call me efficient or productive in Slack messages. I've always considered myself someone with decent self-discipline. But lately, I had started losing track of time, not just in the mornings. In the grocery line, on the toilet, in the parking lot before walking into Target. I was just checking something real quick, and then 15 minutes would vanish like vapor. I started noticing how little space I had left in my mind, how the quiet moments were being filled, not with intention, but with scrolling. And not just any scrolling. Doom scrolling, comparison scrolling, numbing scrolling. Every notification felt urgent. Every video, slightly addictive. Every swipe, a step further away from my own thoughts. After finally dragging myself out of bed, I walked into the bathroom and caught a glimpse of my face in the mirror. Eyes slightly puffy, shoulders slouched, jaw tight. I looked tired, but not the kind of tired that goes away with a nap. I looked overstimulated. And the most frustrating part? I couldn't even remember what I'd just consumed. I had spent 90 minutes online and retained none of it. No joy, no insight, no actual value. Just mental clutter. Just the overwhelming, chaotic noise of a world that never stops shouting. I made coffee. I toasted a slice of bread, slapped on some almond butter, and tried to shift into real-life mode. Emails from work were starting to come in. A few Slack messages. A client request I had missed the day before. But before I opened my laptop, guess what I did? Yep, I opened TikTok. Just a quick laugh before work. Just one more video. And that's when something inside me cracked, not dramatically, not in some movie scene meltdown kind of way. More like a slow, quiet fracture in a wall that had already been wearing thin. I thought, what am I doing? Again, it hit me how long this had been happening. How my mornings had turned from journaling or making scrambled eggs to digital binges. How I hadn't read a full book in months. How I kept telling friends I was too busy, when in reality, I was just tired. Tired from the weight of constant connectivity. I remember back in college, at a small school in Oregon, how I used to start my mornings. I'd bike to a local coffee shop with a paperback novel in my backpack. I'd read, think, breathe. No one expected instant replies. No one tracked their dopamine levels through likes and retweets. Life was slower, not perfect, but grounded. Now, even a red light on the road became an excuse to check notifications. I didn't like who I was becoming. And that Tuesday, as I sat on my tiny gray couch with cold coffee in hand and an untouched to-do list, I opened my browser and typed, "Am I addicted to my phone?" Thousands of results came up. Articles, self-assessments, even helplines. But one sentence stopped me in my tracks. The first step to regaining your freedom is noticing you've lost it. I read it again. The first step to regaining your freedom is noticing you've lost it. That morning was a wake-up call I didn't know I needed. It wasn't dramatic. No panic attack. No breakdown. Just the quiet realization that I had slowly given away the most precious thing I had, my attention. And if I didn't do something soon, it would take even more of my time, my creativity, my presence, my peace. So I made a decision. Not a big one yet. Just a small, silent promise to myself. This ends today. I began the detox on a quiet Saturday morning in South Austin. There was no big announcement, no symbolic deleting of all my apps. Just a yellow Post-it note stuck to my fridge that read, "No Instagram, no Twitter, no TikTok. Email only twice a day. No screens after 9 p.m. And most importantly, no phone in the bedroom." That was it. 5 rules. Simple on paper, impossible in practice. By 10 a.m., just hours into my freedom, I already felt the itch. I had made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the tree-lined street. Normally, I would have pulled out my phone while the coffee brewed, checked a few feeds, maybe watched a short video or two. But now, the phone was tucked away in the hallway drawer. I had done that intentionally, but it still felt like I had misplaced a part of myself. I stared at the empty spot on the table where it used to sit. It felt like a ghost was missing. My brain immediately started whispering, what if someone texted you? What if something urgent came up? What if there's breaking news? Well, of course, nothing urgent happened. The world kept turning. It was me who felt like I had stepped off the carousel. That first day was more uncomfortable than I expected. Not dramatic, just off. I wandered the apartment looking for things to do, but I couldn't settle on anything. I tried to read a book, but found my mind drifting after a few pages. I cleaned the kitchen, took out the trash, stared at the wall. I was so used to filling every empty second with something digital that I had forgotten how to simply exist in the quiet. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk without headphones. That might sound small, but for me, it was radical. I had never walked without a podcast in years. As I stepped out into the Texas heat, something strange happened. I noticed things, like really noticed them. A kid riding a scooter down the sidewalk. The shimmer of heat on the pavement. Wind brushing through the leaves above me. I even noticed myself breathing. I had forgotten how natural that felt. I passed a little lemonade stand set up by a group of kids. Normally I would have smiled and walked by, too distracted. But this time I stopped. Bought a cup, made a dumb joke. They laughed. I laughed. That tiny moment lingered in my chest all evening. But the hardest part wasn't the days, it was the nights. Especially that second night. Around 10 p.m., I was lying in bed, eyes wide open, brain spinning. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't even thinking about anything specific. I just felt unsatisfied. My brain was used to getting one last dopamine hit before sleep, a video, a scroll, a distraction. But I had promised myself, no screens after 9. I tossed, turned, picked up a book, put it back down. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened a blank notebook and just started writing. No structure, no audience, just raw thoughts. One line stood out on the page. This feels like withdrawal, not from substance, but from attention, from stimulation, from noise. It was painfully honest. and incredibly freeing. Day 3 brought unexpected clarity. I was standing in line at H-E-B with a basket of oat milk and bananas. Usually, I would have pulled out my phone the second I got in line, but I didn't. I just stood there and looked around. I noticed the mom ahead of me gently talking to her toddler. I noticed the cashier's fake smile and tired eyes. I noticed how many people were staring at their phones, heads tilted, thumbs moving. I realized this was the first time in months I had stood in public and simply observed without distraction. I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't trying to fill the moment. I was just there, and it felt good. By day 4, something else had changed. I started craving connection, not digital, but real. I called my mom, not a text, a real phone call. She was surprised, said, "Everything okay?" I laughed and said, "Yeah, I just missed hearing your voice." We talked for nearly an hour about her garden, her neighbor's noisy dog, an old birthday party I barely remembered. The next day, I called Josh, my college roommate. We hadn't talked in over 6 months. We ended up reminiscing about the time we got lost in the Colorado Rockies and had to use Google Maps and gut instinct to find our way back. That call reminded me that laughter didn't need a meme or a trending sound. It just needed presence. Still, the week wasn't easy. There were moments I forgot and reached for my phone, only to pull my hand back like it had touched something hot. Moments I felt awkward at work when I didn't know the latest viral video everyone was laughing about. Moments I didn't know what to do with all this extra time. But something was shifting quietly but undeniably. The space once filled with scrolling was being replaced with stillness, focus, memory, and real rest. I started journaling every morning. At first, it felt like a chore, but soon it became my favorite part of the day. It wasn't deep, just whatever was on my mind, but it felt like recovering a lost part of myself. By the end of the week, my mornings were unrecognizable. No more lying in bed with the blue glow of Instagram lighting up my face. No more jumping into other people's lives before even opening my eyes to my own. Now I woke up, brewed coffee, and sat by the window, sometimes with a book, sometimes with silence. I watched the sunrise over the rooftops. I breathed, and that, somehow, felt like the most radical thing I could do. I realized something important, something I hadn't dared admit before. The internet wasn't just stealing my time. It was stealing my stillness. That delicate, irreplaceable stillness that lives in the early hours, before the world starts asking things of you. On Sunday night, I flipped back through my journal and found a sentence I had written on day 2. There's a difference between being connected and being consumed. And that was the truth of it. I didn't want to abandon the internet completely. I didn't want to go off-grid or buy a flip phone. But I did want to reclaim something. My attention, my choices, my mornings, my presence. I wasn't cured. I hadn't solved it. But I had survived the first week. And in that quiet, ordinary victory, I had found something I didn't expect to myself. Rebuilding my digital life, one choice at a time. The 30-day break didn't end with a bang. There was no confetti, no enlightenment moment, no dramatic farewell to my old habits. It ended the same way it began, quietly. But when the 30th morning arrived, I didn't rush back online. I didn't reinstall everything at once or flood my life with all the apps I'd locked away. Instead, I just sat there with my cup of coffee and asked myself a question I had never seriously asked before. What do I want the internet to do for me? For years, I let the internet decide how I spent my time, what I paid attention to, and how I felt about myself. It was like living in a house where the guests had taken over. They rearranged the furniture, threw loud parties at all hours, and filled the walls with noise. I had to take my home back. But now that I'd kicked them out, I needed to decide, who do I actually want to let back in? I made a list. A real, handwritten list. On the left side, the tools. Email, Google Maps, My calendar, the local news app, on the right side, the traps, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, autoplay, TikTok, infinite scroll. It became clear that most of the stress didn't come from the internet itself. It came from the way I let it seep into every corner of my day. I didn't need to cut everything out forever. I just needed boundaries, not restrictions, intentions. I started small. I reinstalled email, but turned off all push notifications. I allowed myself to check it only at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. I re-added YouTube, but I disabled the homepage and suggestions using a browser extension. No autoplay, no rabbit holes, just intentional watching. Instagram? I didn't bring it back. At least not yet. Twitter? Gone. It was never about connection. It was about outrage, comparison, noise. I set a screen time limit for my phone, 90 minutes per day, spread across the tools I had chosen. I added a shortcut that dimmed my screen and blocked all apps at 8:30 p.m. sharp. No screens in bed. Ever. I bought an alarm clock. Yes, an actual analog clock. And charged my phone overnight in the kitchen. These weren't dramatic gestures, but they were powerful because they were mine. They weren't rules made out of guilt or fear. They were choices made from clarity. As I rebuilt my digital life, I began to notice the ripple effects. I was calmer in the mornings, no longer rushing through other people's updates before brushing my teeth. I had room to breathe, to set my own tone for the day. I started to look forward to the quiet, those first few minutes of coffee, lights slipping through the blinds, no buzzing, no alerts. Work became more focused. Without background tabs pulling me into social media, I finished tasks faster. I was more present in meetings. I felt sharper, clearer, more decisive. I even started writing more, for fun, not just for deadlines. But the biggest change wasn't productivity. It was presence. I found myself listening more to people, to the city, to myself. I noticed details again. The sound of my neighbor's wind chimes on breezy afternoons. The smell of fresh ground coffee. The way my cat stretches her paws just before she falls asleep. These things had always been there. I had just been too distracted to notice. One night, I had dinner with friends, no phones on the table. We laughed until someone cried. We told stories with no punchlines. We just were fully there. I remember thinking, this is what I've been missing. There were slip-ups, of course. Days when I broke my own rules. Nights when I scrolled longer than I planned. Times when I felt the old itch, especially during stress or boredom. But I no longer beat myself up. I simply noticed, paused, and asked, what am I actually looking for right now? Connection? Comfort? Escape? That question helped me redirect. Sometimes it led me to a book. Other times, to a phone call. Sometimes I just needed a deep breath and a minute away from any screen. What surprised me most was how many hours I got back. Not just clock time, but soul time. I began filling those hours with things that made me feel whole, not just entertained. I started painting again. Badly, but joyfully. I went on weekend hikes. I journaled with real paper and ink. I rewatched old movies without checking my phone every 10 minutes. I realized that the internet can still be beautiful when it's used as a tool, not a crutch. When it enhances, not replaces. When it's chosen, not defaulted. One day, I opened Instagram again, not from craving, but curiosity. I stayed for 7 minutes. No doom scrolling. No comparing. Just checking in. And then I logged off. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That was the shift. That was the victory. Now, my relationship with the internet isn't perfect. It never will be. But it's mine now. And that makes all the difference. I don't want to live against technology. I want to live with it. Wisely, intentionally, honestly. Because in the end, it's not about quitting the internet. It's about remembering how to live. The deeper why. What I was really escaping. At first, I thought my phone addiction was just about habit. Something shallow. A simple distraction. A tech problem. But during the 30 days I spent away from social media, autoplay videos, and mindless scrolling, I started to realize something deeper. The more silence I sat with, the more I resisted the urge to reach for my phone, the more it became clear It wasn't the screen I was addicted to. It was the escape. I wasn't just numbing boredom. I was avoiding something. Something bigger. Something inside. It started showing up in quiet moments. When I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea, no music, no podcast, no device. It was in those spaces that I began to feel what I'd been avoiding all along, myself. Not the curated version, not the edited posts or the smiling photos, but the unfiltered me. And truthfully, I didn't know how to be with that person. For years, I had buried discomfort under content. Whenever I felt lonely, I opened TikTok. When I felt insecure, I posted something clever on Twitter. When I was overwhelmed, I scrolled reels until my brain went numb. I used to tell myself I was just relaxing, but what I was really doing was dissociating. I wasn't resting. I was escaping. And when I finally stopped giving myself that easy out, all the hard stuff came rushing in, old fears, unprocessed grief, dreams I gave up on too early, insecurities I pretended didn't exist. I realized I had built an entire digital world to protect me from having to feel what I didn't want to feel. It was easier to watch strangers fall in love on Instagram than to admit I hadn't dated in years. Easier to read articles about productivity than to face how directionless I sometimes felt. Easier to stay updated than to admit I didn't like the way I was living. And once I saw that truth, I couldn't unsee it. I remember one night in particular. I had just finished dinner alone. The house was quiet. I didn't reach for the remote. I didn't open my laptop. I just sat in the silence. And out of nowhere, I felt this rush of sadness, not overwhelming, but honest. It wasn't about being alone. It was about finally feeling the loneliness that had been there the whole time, hiding behind my habits. I realized I'd spent years running from myself, swiping, scrolling, distracting. And now, in the silence, I had nowhere left to run. But here's the strange part. That silence, that stillness, that raw discomfort, it became sacred. Because underneath all the noise I had used to shield myself, I started to hear something else, truth. I remembered I used to love writing, not just emails or tweets, but real writing. I remembered what it felt like to lose track of time while painting or cooking or sitting in a hammock with a book. I remembered the version of me who didn't need a screen to feel alive. And I realized something profound. Maybe we don't fear boredom. Maybe we fear what boredom reveals. That we're not as happy as we pretend. That we're lonelier than we want to admit. That we've been delaying the hard conversations with others, with ourselves, for too long. And if that's true, then healing doesn't begin with deleting apps. It begins with building the courage to sit with what we've been hiding from. That doesn't mean I've abandoned technology. I haven't. I still use the internet. I still text, stream, scroll, sometimes more than I'd like to. But now, I ask different questions. Before I open an app, I pause and ask, am I connecting or am I avoiding? And that 1 second of reflection makes all the difference. Because what I've learned is this: when you stop running, your life catches up with you. And even though some of what it brings is painful, regrets, fears, sadness, it also brings clarity, presence, and, if you're patient, joy. Joy that isn't downloaded or streamed, but earned through presence, through honesty, through choosing to be awake. I used to think the hardest part about giving up the internet was boredom. But now I know the hardest part is facing yourself. And once you do, you realize there's been something beautiful underneath the noise all along. You, whole, waiting, ready to be heard. Coming back to the internet after 30 days offline felt strange, like visiting a place you used to live, only to realize it doesn't feel like home anymore. The feeds were still there. The notifications, the trends, the noise, it had all kept moving while I stepped away. But I wasn't the same. I no longer saw the online world as neutral ground. I saw it as terrain I had to navigate with intention or risk getting swept up all over again. The challenge now wasn't how to quit. It was how to return differently, how to live with technology without living inside it. That meant redefining my relationship with the tools I once used unconsciously. I didn't want to delete everything forever. I wanted to choose what stayed. So I asked myself, what makes me feel alive, connected, purposeful? And what just fills time while making me feel worse? I began rebuilding my digital life from scratch, like designing a home. I asked, what belongs at the center? What belongs at the edge? What doesn't belong at all? I kept email with limits. I brought back YouTube, but only for specific channels that taught or inspired. I added Spotify for music, but removed all notifications. I decided to leave Instagram and TikTok off my phone completely. I didn't miss them anymore. Not the endless scrolling, not the curated realities, not the subtle pressure to keep up. Well, I brought back on my terms. And I set boundaries, not as restrictions, but as reminders of what mattered most. Now, I have screen-free mornings. No checking anything before 9 a.m. I protect the first hour of my day like sacred ground. It's where I meet myself before I meet the world. I journal, stretch, sometimes just stare out the window. And that silence? It still feels holy. During the day, I batch my internet time. I check email twice. I use a blocker that shuts down social media sites after 30 minutes. I don't keep my phone at the dinner table, and I don't sleep with it next to my bed. Instead, I charge in the kitchen, and I fall asleep reading or just being still. These boundaries may sound small, but they give me something big, my attention, my agency. My days no longer feel hijacked. They feel chosen. And slowly, I've begun to live a different kind of online. One that doesn't start with noise. One that ends with peace. One where technology is a tool, not a default. A servant, not a master. And something surprising has happened. I enjoy the internet more. Because I'm no longer using it to escape. I'm using it to create, to connect, to learn. And when it starts to pull me into the old vortex, I notice. I pause. I breathe. I ask, is this helping me feel more present or more lost? Sometimes I still get it wrong, but I catch it faster now. I forgive myself quicker, because this isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about living awake. The truth is, we're not meant to reject the digital world entirely. We're meant to reclaim our place within it, to stop being data points and start being people again. People with boundaries, with values, with real lives happening beyond the screen. These days, I still get online. I still use apps. I still scroll sometimes. But I do it differently. I do it with choice. And that one change, that shift from passive to intentional, is everything. It's the line between consumption and creation, between distraction and depth, between burnout and balance. I used to think going offline was the goal. Now I see the real goal is to go within, to become the kind of person who can live with technology while still staying rooted in the real world. The kind of person who can log off without feeling lost, who can be still without being scared, who can look up from the screen and still recognize their own life. I'm still learning. I'm still unlearning. But I'm here, awake. And that, to me, is what a new kind of online really looks like. Not perfect, not disconnected, but conscious. And in a world that profits off our distraction, maybe the most radical thing we can do is simply pay attention. Looking back on the past 5 weeks, I realized I didn't just take a break from the internet. I took a journey back to myself. What started as a 30-day digital detox became something much deeper, much quieter, and far more personal. I thought I was stepping away from distraction, but really I was stepping into something I had been avoiding for a long time, my own presence. In the beginning, I just wanted to feel less tired, less scattered, less addicted to the constant stream of content. I wanted my time back, my focus, maybe even my sleep. What I didn't expect was to rediscover stillness, to meet the parts of me that had been buried under notifications, likes, autoplay videos, and the pressure to keep up with everyone else's highlight reel. The silence at first felt uncomfortable, even painful. Without my usual digital crutches, I had to sit with feelings I didn't always know how to name: boredom, loneliness, restlessness, even grief. But over time, I began to see that silence not as a void, but as a mirror. And in that mirror, I started to recognize who I really was beneath the scroll, beyond the screen. I remembered how much I loved writing, not to perform, but to process. I remembered how much I craved deep conversation, not comments, but real connection. I remembered the pleasure of walking without a destination, reading without distraction, cooking without checking my phone every 5 minutes. More than anything, I remembered that my life had texture, meaning, and rhythm all on its own, without the constant digital interference. And when I finally returned to the online world, I returned differently. Not in a rush, not with anxiety, but with intention. I no longer let the internet choose my attention for me. I choose where it goes. I no longer pick up my phone the second I open my eyes. I let myself arrive in the day. I no longer measure connection by comments or reactions. I look for warmth, for honesty, for presence. I've learned that it's not about quitting the internet forever. It's about reclaiming your power inside it. It's not about living offline. It's about living awake, even when you're online. We live in a world designed to keep us scrolling, comparing, reacting. And if we don't pause, if we don't question, it becomes very easy to trade our days for someone else's algorithm. But the truth is, no app will ever know what matters to you more than you do. No feed can replace your intuition. No amount of content can fill the space that's asking to be filled with real life. The greatest freedom I've found isn't in turning everything off. It's in learning when to say yes and when to say enough. Yes to learning. Yes to creativity. Yes to intentional connection. But enough to noise. Enough to numbing. Enough to digital overwhelm disguised as entertainment. If you've read or listened this far, maybe you feel it too. That quiet ache beneath the habits. That subtle fatigue that even 10 hours of sleep can't fix. That flicker of awareness that you're not quite where you want to be, not because you've failed, but because you've drifted. Let me tell you something. You're not alone. And you're not broken. You're just waking up. And that, right there, is the beginning of real change. So here's what I'd leave you with if we were talking face to face. Start small. Don't try to be perfect. Just notice. One moment, one scroll, one choice at a time. Make space for quiet again, for boredom, for presence, for the part of you that's been waiting patiently beneath the noise. Rebuild your digital world to reflect your real one, not the other way around. Because in the end, your attention is your life. What you give it to, you give your life to. And you, your mind, your heart, your breath, your time, you are worth protecting. If this story touched something in you, if even one part of it felt familiar, I'd love to hear from you. What's your relationship with technology like these days? Have you ever tried stepping away from the internet? What did you learn? Or maybe you're thinking about starting now. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. No judgment here, just real people figuring it out together. And hey, if you found value in this story, it would mean the world if you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who might need a little digital reset too. This isn't just about screens. It's about how we live. Let's keep the conversation going together.